Hi, I'm Ashley Purdin with Pioneer Horsemanship, and today I'm going to talk to you about an exercise that you can use to help change your horse's top line, promote hind-end engagement, increase your horse's range of motion throughout their stride, and increase their flexibility. And if this sounds like this exercise is going to be super complicated, I promise you it's actually not. We're going to use some ground poles and cavalettes to help us bring this change along in our horses. So this exercise can be done under saddle or on the ground. You can incorporate your ground poles into your lunging circle if you would like. And we're gonna start this at the walk. So the walk is probably one of the most underutilized gaits in general with horse trainers and amateur riders. I think a lot of times we feel that if we spend a lot of time walking the horses, we're just wasting our precious time that we have to spend riding our horses. And we may only have 30 or 45 minutes to do a session with them. And to spend 10 to 20 minutes of that walking seems really, really tough. And I've really had to reframe this in my mind as well, because I'm a horse trainer too. I'm trying to get through a certain number of horses in a day so I can get to my lessons. And even in my lessons, it's easy to have people just trot right off and not spend enough time walking. So this is something that I've really started to be more intentional about. And it's pretty amazing the difference in the horses. The thing that I probably noticed the most about just adding more walking in is the increase in flexibility that all my horses have. It's really changed their muscle tone. Typically the horses that I was working hard before would get a little bit bound up muscle wise, and now that's just not happening. So it's been pretty amazing. Then when you add these poles in, you're able to increase the range of motion of each of their limbs as they're crossing the poles, and in particular as you add in elevation to the poles. So if you put the pole on a block and turn it into more of a cavalette that the horse has to step over, that is really going to increase the range that the horse is having to, that range of motion that the horse is having to bring their entire limb through as they step over that obstacle. So horses typically have a weak leg, and for most horses that's going to be their right hind leg. And going over poles encourages them to use their body evenly, especially if you put the poles in a straight line. Now this exercise in particular, I have the poles on an arc so that if you do want to use this on the ground, it just makes it that much easier to transfer it to a groundwork exercise. So be sure you're intentional about working this exercise both directions. I typically don't change my poles over when I change directions, so the pattern doesn't have to be the exact mirror of itself the other way, but you will get probably the best result if you do that, but usually I just, for the sake of time, just leave the poles out. I think that you will still get plenty enough of a result if you leave them exactly as they are and work them from left to right first, or whichever way you want to go first. We're going to do left to right first in this video, and then work them right to left later. You can also start adding transitions in on this exercise as your horse gets warmed up. After you complete walking over the poles, you can add in a jog and jog around the arena and come back to the poles and make a walk transition, and then repeat that. You can add all sorts of transitions in. I do encourage people to do this in a corner of the arena and then ride the entire arena. You want to remember that you're asking your horse to use very different muscles going over poles than if they're just working in the flat arena. So if we get too crazy and work this on a really small circle where they're having to repeat the poles over and over and over again quickly, back to back, we are increasing the chance that the horse might strain a muscle or get really sore from doing this. So keep that in mind. These are very different muscles than what your horse has been using, and just start small. Maybe the first day you only go over the poles 4 or 5 times and then build off of that. This exercise is going to be the most useful over a period of time. So if you just start making this part of your warm-up, and I love using ground poles too because it breaks up the monotony of walking for my warm-up. And by the way, there's a lot of things that you can do while you're walking Side passing and backing are two things that you can add to your walking time. You can add other lateral movements like half passing or leg yielding. You can add moving their shoulders around. So there's a lot of different things you can do while you're walking. You don't just have to walk on a loose rein, although I would recommend that for at least the first 5 to 8 minutes of your ride, just to allow the horse to get a little bit more warmed up and get the blood worked around to their different muscles before you start asking for specific things. Walking a lot is also going to help lubricate their joints and get that joint fluid warmed up to where it's actually lubricating more of the joint than it was when they were standing still. So as you work through these pulls, pay attention to your horse. Each horse is going to respond differently to going over pulls. And some horses are going to have physical limitations that will be brought out or exacerbated as you go over the pulls. So if you notice that the first couple of times your horse went over the pulls and it was kind of as expected or decent, and then you do it 2 more times and the horse starts tripping over everything much, much worse, you may want to have a vet out. Also, if you notice your horse is bringing both hind legs together and hopping over poles, especially as you start elevating them, that's another sign, if that doesn't resolve fairly quickly, that you probably need to get a lameness exam done by your vet. Anytime that I notice something come up when I'm asking my horse for a new exercise and something that should be fairly achievable, if they're really struggling with it, I know now that there is a hole somewhere in that horse's physical musculature or joints or something that needs a little bit more attention than what I can just give it in a training session. Also, another option is to have an equine body worker out. And a lot of times I will do that. Just depends on the horse, depends on the situation. Sometimes I'll have the vet out very first, follow that up with an equine body worker. And that seems to work really nicely together. And then you can go back to doing your pull work again. So let's talk about this exercise specifically. We're gonna work it left to right on this diagram. And you're going to notice that the spacing is a little bit different between the first and the second pull than it is between the second and the third pull. So the first and second pull are going to be 1 stride apart. And 1 stride for your horse is them completing a full footfall pattern, okay? So a footfall pattern, every gait has its own unique footfall pattern and its own unique amount of beats to that gait. So the walk is a 4-beat gait, the trot or the jog is going to be a 2-beat gait, and the lope or the canter is going to be a 3-beat gait. So the football pattern for the walk would be right hind followed by right front, and then left hind followed by left front. And after each of those 4 feet touch the ground individually, you have gotten through a full football pattern. So for your average horse, the walking distance between the 2 poles and it being 1 complete stride is going to be roughly 6 feet. But if your horse is a little bit smaller or a little bit bigger, you might have to adjust that. You might start this on the ground and watch your horse walk through and see if they complete a full stride within that gap, or if they don't, and then you can change your pole distance up from there. Usually after I get it adjusted to a specific horse, I step it off and figure out what the distance was. The distance between the second and the third pole is going to just be 1 step. So as they're stepping into it, they should only get 1 front foot followed by 1 hind foot stepping into that space in between those poles. And these 2 poles, at first I have all 3 poles just on the ground, but then once I start raising this and increasing the challenge of this exercise for the horse, again, over time, don't get too crazy with this at the beginning if this is brand new to your horse. Over time, I can actually elevate those second 2 ground poles, and that's gonna create a really nice pelvis rotation as they go over those poles, which is gonna really help loosen up their pelvis, which for horses, it's a place that gets extremely stiff and sticky, and we tend to be stiff and sticky in our pelvises too when we ride, which promotes more stiffness in them. So this is a great way that you can help get everybody loosened up in your warm up as you're walking over these. And again, feel free to just reverse this exercise, change directions without resetting it, and walk over it the other way. I love using pull work in my warm-up process. It just helps bring the horse's limbs through an increased range of motion. I'm creating mobility and flexibility throughout the limbs and the shoulders and the pelvis and the neck and the spine. And as the pulls get elevated, that range of motion gets greater. So be cautious as you elevate your pulls. Start small. You can just bring them a couple inches off of the ground to start with, and then get them to where they're about a foot off of the ground as you get this to be more advanced for your horse. So remember the value of doing this exercise at a walk. The walk is actually going to be the gait with the most flexibility for us to promote change in it. So I don't mean that that gait is more flexible than other gaits. I mean it's the most easy for us to influence and create change. And if you spend time at the walk getting the horse to loosen up, you will notice the benefit of that translate to all of your other gaits as well. Your horse will feel more fluid and flexible. Their quality of gait will feel improved. Their hind end engagement will be improved. And overall, over a period of time, their top line will develop in a much more positive way. So I hope you enjoyed this tip. Let me know how it goes, and I'll see you next time.